Rod Rosenstein is in the most difficult position probably of anybody in the history of the Department of Justice. He's trying to thread the needle between a president who's pressuring him for political purposes and for his own interests against protecting an institution, the Department of Justice and the FBI.
That was our friend and contributor and former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts weighing in on this news that Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein asked the DOJ Inspector General to review claims that the FBI had surveilled the Trump campaign somehow for political purposes. As we reported, the move came after the president demanded an investigation over Twitter this weekend. Legal experts are worried that this is a dangerous new benchmark in an area of obstruction. The rest of us can plainly see this president's public war with all things Justice Department related, from the boss, Jeff Sessions, on down. This is from a month ago. Quote, much of the bad blood with Russia is caused by the fake and corrupt Russia investigation, headed up by the all-Democrat loyalists or people that worked for Obama. Mueller is most conflicted of all, except Rosenstein, who signed FISA and Comey letter. No collusion, so they go crazy. Here to talk about it, Cynthia Oxney's back with us, former federal prosecutor and a veteran of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. And Matthew Miller's back with us, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department. So, Cynthia, I've wanted to hear you out on this. Your response to Trump's demands and your response of what we know to be the Rosenstein response so far.
Well, I feel like I'm watching my second hockey game of the night. In this hockey game, it's the old Philadelphia Flyers of the 70s, the Broad Street Bullies at the White House, beating up on a DOJ farm team. And apparently no refs showed up, and the DOJ team is standing around whining, and meanwhile the Broad Street Bullies are beating them up and scoring. This is a terrible thing that Rosenstein has caved. I do feel sorry for him, especially this morning when Clint Watts was talking. We didn't realize that not only was he going to cave and do this investigation, but now they're handing over documents that they shouldn't be handing over. The problem with a bully is if you give in to him a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, pretty soon you have nothing. And that's what's happened here.
And Matt, I heard you express this viewpoint earlier today, and I thought long and hard about it. And I've also seen some coverage since. There's your viewpoint that Rosenstein has given up too much incrementally over time. But there is also a view being expressed tonight that this might be brilliant because it buys time and keeps Rosenstein on the job.
Look, I think it's a very close call, and I'm sympathetic to the predicament and the situation that Rosenstein finds himself in. I think to answer that question, you really have to know what he's trying to accomplish. Does he think that he just needs 2 more months, 3 more months, and he needs to buy Bob Mueller just a little bit of space and time and prevent the president from blowing up the investigation? If that's so, maybe you can see your way around this compromise that he's come up with. But I will say, taken by itself, this is a kind of terrible thing that Rosenstein has allowed the president to do. He basically demanded a counter investigation into the people investigating him, and he got it. That's a red line that the president crossed, and not only was he not only did no one stand up and say no, he was rewarded to it. Now you have the Department of Justice giving credence to the idea that there was something nefarious with the way that this investigation was launched, and giving credence to the idea that it's okay for the president to order up these kind of investigations when, of course, it's not. So I worry that what Rod is doing is, look, he's trying to kind of retreat and do strategic retreats, knowing that he will stand and fight at the right time, and that may very well be the right approach. What I worry about is that by the time he decides to stand and make his fight, there may be nothing left for him to fight for.
Cynthia, there's also this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Inspector General is not nothing. You'll seldom meet an Inspector General who goes to work in the morning thinking, boy, I hope I don't police up any wrongdoing today, that when they're concentrating on you in the Justice Department, it's hard to think of anything else.
Well, and this is a very respected Inspector General. The fact that this has been added to his plate, that isn't what bothers me. And I think what bothers me is that I'm just afraid at some point there won't be a way to stand up to Trump. And we're approaching that. And part of it is because over the last year, every time Trump attacks, nobody does anything. I mean, even when he attacks Sessions and makes fun of him, Sessions doesn't stand up to him. When he fires Comey, Sessions says nothing. And hopefully, it would have been nice if there were some refs, which would have been the Republican leadership. And they aren't even participating in the game. So that's what worries me. The Inspector General is a serious investigator, and he's a good investigator and a fair investigator, but that's not the fundamental problem here.
Cynthia, let me read this to you. 3 days after Christmas, Donald Trump comes off the golf course at Mar-a-Lago and says to the New York Times, I don't want to get into loyalty, but I'll tell you that I will say this. Holder protected President Obama, totally protected him. When you look at the IRS scandal, when you look at the guns for whatever, when you look at all the tremendous real problems they had, not made up problems like Russian collusion, these were real problems. When you look at the things that they did, and Holder protected the president, and I have great respect for that. I'll be honest, I have great respect for that. Cynthia, it's been said that the president does view the Justice Department as a lever of government at his command.
He views it as a sort of something that he should be able to control with a whim. Let me tell you something about Eric Holder. If Barack Obama called him on the phone and started to tell him what to do, Eric Holder would have told him to pound sand.
Okay, and Matt, when the GOP leaders are allowed to see whatever documents there are, what's the chance the documents are going to be exculpatory and not reveal a huge spying effort? Will that still be spun as a win somehow?
Yeah, they may be exculpatory. We've seen that in the past, certainly when they got documents out of the Justice Department that they hoped would prove one of their conspiracy theories true, and all it did was, provide more damaging revelations about the behavior on the president's campaign. That may happen here, but of course the cost that the country is going to bear before we get there, we've already seen. We've already seen the name of this classified source in London who was was helping the FBI in their investigation. We've already seen his name exposed. If you read the Washington Post and the New York Times, we've already seen the FBI having to go around and try to button up other operations, other investigations he was involved in. They're worried that associates of his may have their lives at risk. So there may be, when this is all said and done, if the information comes out, there may be, political damage to the president because it shows that, the FBI was acting appropriately. But, I'm much more worried about the political damage to the country, the political damage to the FBI's ability to protect its sources, the FBI's ability to recruit sources around the country, than I am whatever political ramifications may happen if and when this information is turned over and eventually becomes public.
Point taken. 2 Department of Justice veterans, one of whom I think outed herself as a Washington Capitals fan tonight. They have been victorious. Matthew Mueller, Cynthia Oxney, thank you both for coming on. We really appreciate it. Coming up, new reporting suggests Russia may not have been the only country interested in the Trump campaign. The latest on the second Trump Tower meeting, again with the president's eldest son, Don Jr., when the 11th hour continues. For the first time, we're learning details about a second Trump Tower meeting, a different one, that has caught the attention of special counsel Robert Mueller. According to the New York Times, just 3 months before the election, Donald Trump Jr. met with Republican donor Eric Prince. Remember him? He's the founder of the military contractor Blackwater, happens to be the brother of the current Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and a man named George Nader, who has close relationships with real princes from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and a third man identified as an Israeli social media specialist. Now, according to the Times, those present offered to help Trump win. Quote, the meetings are the first indication that countries other than Russia may have offered assistance to the Trump campaign in the months before the presidential election. The interactions are a focus of the investigation by Robert Mueller. It goes on to say the interviews, some in recent weeks, are further evidence that special counsel's investigation remains in an intense phase, even as Mr. Trump's lawyers are publicly calling for Mr. Mueller to bring it to a close. The president, of course, fired back on the report on Twitter, quote, things are really getting ridiculous. The failing and crooked, but not as crooked as Hillary Clinton, New York Times, has done a long and boring story indicating that the world's most expensive witch hunt has found nothing on Russia and me, so now they are looking at the rest of the world. Here to talk about it, Robert Anderson, former FBI Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, former Executive Assistant Director of the Criminal, Cyber, Response, and Services Branch, and Michael Crowley, National Security Editor and Senior Foreign Affairs Correspondent for Politico. Good evening and welcome to you both. Bob, I'll start with you. What is Mueller interested in, do you think, about this meeting? And what does it tell us that they're asking about this meeting? We're on a lag of several weeks behind the Mueller investigation, I'm sure, but they're asking about it late in the game.
Yeah. So I think it shows a couple things clearly. It puts the president's eldest son square in the meeting of multiple meetings now with multiple countries that he's looking at in any way he can to try to help his father potentially win the presidency of the United States. I think that's very important. It spans way outside of Russia. Obviously, it brings in UAE, Saudi Arabia, aspects of Israel into this also. And I think it also shows clearly the complete lack of understanding of potential laws around this type of action or counterintelligence concerns that obviously Bob Mueller would be looking at in his investigation.
Please help us with one thing. In your experience, did Hyannis have visitors from around the world and nations trying to get in on the Kennedy campaign? Did Kennebunkport have people from the UAE come in and try to have an in the Bush campaign? How normal or not normal is this kind of behavior, these kinds of visitors?
I think it's a great question. So the answer is it's very normal. I think a lot of countries try to get in as quick as they can to try to get close to anybody that's trying to run for a seat of power in our country. I think one of the things that is clear, though, in this campaign, especially after the president won, was the lack, especially early on in his presidency and late in his campaign, of anybody there that even understood the relevance of counterintelligence or foreign intelligence operations that could have been launched or potentially possibly put in front of anybody in his campaign.
Michael, on a political score, this can't be good for the man Jimmy Kimmel insists all media call DJ TJ, Donald J. Trump Jr.
No, absolutely not, Brian. You know, there was an interesting defense of him in the media today where some unnamed ally of his was saying, look, he's naive, he's trusting, he wants to please people, he'll take a meeting with anyone, and he wants it to end on good terms, so people might, you know, kind of take the wrong message out of a meeting like this where maybe he seemed receptive when in fact he was just kind of being a nice wide-eyed guy. You know, maybe the other interpretation is that the Trump family and the Trump operation was sort of had an anything goes attitude towards this campaign and felt like, great, if a foreign government wants to help us, we either know that that is wrong and don't care, or we haven't really paid a lot of attention to how American elections are supposed to run, and we are not aware that this is highly improper. So we'll sit down and talk to them and hear what they have to say. I should say it's important to note the Times story does not make it clear whether there was any follow-through, whether there might have been some violation of the law, but it looks terrible for Donald Trump Jr. to have had the meeting at all, particularly in the context of that Trump Tower meeting with Russians who were peddling what they said was dirt on Hillary Clinton. It just suggests that Mueller should keep looking because they were open to things that most people would have said, get out of here, we're not interested in.
So, Bob, what does that lead you to believe the Mueller questions are about?
Well, I think Mueller's going to look at intent, right? So not only after they had the first meeting with Russia, but then had subsequent meetings with other countries. I think that shows a clear intent, as we were talking about earlier, that they'd look for any aspect of help, even if it's outside the United States. And I think that's what's startling a lot of people in this investigation. That is definitely where they're going to dive into, and that's where they're going to focus.
On the subject of dirt, I want to show you something Rudy Giuliani said. We'll come back and act as a truth squad right after we hear this.
When I ran against them, they were looking for dirt on me every day. I mean, that's what you do. Maybe you shouldn't, but you do. It's nothing illegal about that. And even if it comes from a Russian or a German or an American, it doesn't matter. And they never used it. That's the main thing. They never used it. They rejected it. If there was collusion with the Russians, they would have used it.
How true is that?
I think it's absolutely not true. I think, honestly, Mr. Giuliani is really losing credibility rapidly when he starts talking like that. I think any common sense American that doesn't even understand the criminal legality of what we're talking about would not agree with any foreign power trying to influence our presidential election.
Michael, this can happen when you have a well-known lawyer/spokesman for your cause. When the other team, in this case Robert Mueller, not only doesn't leak, they seem to be hermetically sealed. They don't react to these allegations. These allegations hang out there and become the truth for some over time.
Yeah, Brian, I hope people will look at Politico tomorrow morning. A story I edited today has a headline. I believe it was Robert Mueller has a new spokesman, Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani is out here saying all these things that he says Mueller is doing. Mueller has told him this. Mueller has this kind of timeline, and Mueller can't respond. Mueller has been incredibly tight-lipped. It's possible he's leaking to journalists and we don't know about it, but I have to tell you, Brian, the sort of feeling among journalists in Washington is really that is not happening. It's not like everyone in Washington knows that Mueller is dishing and the rest of America doesn't know. It really does not seem to be the case. And I just want to say specifically on that soundbite, it's very odd. Rudy seems to be saying, well, if there was dirt, they would have used it from the Russians. But, well, they did. I mean, what were the WikiLeaks emails? What were the hacks of the DNC and John Podesta's emails? These emails were clearly hacked by the Russians, and Donald Trump stood up at a podium on stage waving printouts of these emails saying, I love WikiLeaks. He did use them. So it's a little bit odd for Rudy to imply there that there was an opportunity to use Russian-supplied dirt, but the Trump campaign turned its back. In fact, Trump completely embraced it beyond the time when it seemed pretty clear that the Russian government was behind the hacking of these emails.
Our thanks to two friends of ours, a law enforcement veteran and a journalism veteran, Robert Anderson, Michael Crowley. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. And coming up for us, just last week, the president was asked about a possible Nobel Peace Prize. Well, fast forward to tonight, and the question is that summit with North Korea still going to happen? We'll talk about it right after this.